It begins so simply with something so small, a breath. Not a special breath, not a breath drawn in ceremony or silence, just the ordinary inhale and exhale that moves through your body at every moment, often unnoticed. But when that breath is seen clearly, felt fully, and received without resistance, it becomes something else. It becomes a path, a home, a teacher, a doorway. This is the wisdom the Buddha pointed toward. Not a truth hidden in some distant realm, but a truth that breathes itself into your lungs even now. That wisdom does not require belief. It does not require that you become someone else or purify yourself beyond your humanity. It asks only this: can you stay with one breath completely? Can you meet the moment with nothing added and nothing taken away? When Siddhartha Gautama sat beneath the Bodhi tree, he did not escape his humanity. He entered it fully. He sat not as a god, but as a human being, vulnerable to fear, desire, memory, fatigue. But he remained. He stayed. And with every breath, he watched the arising and passing of sensations, thoughts, feelings. He saw their impermanence, their emptiness, their interdependence. And in that seeing, he awoke. Not to something new, but to what had always been present. This presence, this spacious awareness, begins with a breath. But what is a breath, really? It is the body's first and final act, the movement that marks our arrival and departure. It is involuntary, yet it can be known. It is physical, yet it can open a door to the immaterial. Each breath arises on its own, uninvited, ungrasped. It comes in, fills the lungs, brushes the ribs and leaves, and in that movement, everything is revealed. Change, effortlessness, connection, letting go. Yet we so rarely live there. Our attention is elsewhere, drawn into the storm of thought, the pull of memory, the grasping at plans. We live as if life is somewhere else, always just beyond the next achievement, the next explanation, the next distraction. But all the while, breath continues, quiet, steady, waiting. This is why the Buddha instructed his followers, again and again, to return to the breath, not as a practice of control, but as an invitation to intimacy. He said, "When breathing in long, know that you are breathing in long. When breathing out short, know that you are breathing out short. In this knowing, there is no effort to alter, no striving to perfect, only presence, only awareness meeting reality as it is. This kind of attention is not passive. It is alert, alive, engaged. To truly feel a breath means to step out of the trance of thought and into the vividness of now. It means to inhabit the body, not just in concept, but in sensation. The rising of the belly, the stretch of the lungs, the cooling of the air as it enters the nostrils, the warmth as it leaves. And as you stay with this breath, something shifts. At first, you may encounter restlessness. The mind will wander, it will tell stories, it will resist the simplicity of this moment. But if you return, gently, without judgment, you begin to notice the patterns. You see the way thought arises like mist, floats for a while and disappears. You see how emotion swells, crests and fades. You realize that you are not the contents of the mind, but the space in which they appear. In this way, the breath becomes a mirror. It reflects your clinging and your letting go. It shows you your distractions, your tensions, your impatience, but it does not condemn. It simply reveals. And in that revealing, there is freedom. Not because something is added, but because illusion is seen through. The breath, in its quiet wisdom, teaches impermanence. No two breaths are the same. Each one arises fresh and unrepeatable. Even when you are not paying attention, this rhythm of life continues. Inhale, exhale, arrival, departure. It mirrors the rhythm of all things, birth and death, gain and loss, joy and sorrow. To breathe consciously is to surrender to the flow of existence, to stop trying to hold the river and instead float with it, awake, at ease. And with that surrender comes peace. Not the peace of escape or numbness, but the peace of intimacy with what is. The breath doesn't promise to fix your life. It won't erase your past or guarantee your future. But it will anchor you here, where life is actually happening. It will offer you the possibility of meeting each moment not as a problem to be solved, but as a presence to be inhabited. This is the power of one deep breath. It cuts through the noise. It interrupts the momentum of identification. It breaks the trance. One breath, fully known, has the power to undo the self. Not through force, but through clarity. For in that breath, you are no longer past or future, no longer a role or a mask. You are simply here. You are presence itself. And this presence is the ground of awakening. When the Buddha spoke of liberation, he spoke not in grand metaphysical terms, but in terms of what could be seen and known directly. He said, "There is a path to the end of suffering, and it begins right where you are." He offered the breath not as a technique to master, but as a way to see the truth for yourself, a way to untangle the habits of mind, a way to know that suffering arises and that it can cease. And so, the breath becomes not just a moment of peace, but a doorway into wisdom. With each breath, you begin to see more clearly the causes of suffering, craving, aversion, ignorance. You see how the mind reaches, grasps, resists. You see how it creates stories, identities, dramas, and you begin softly to let them go. Not all at once, not perfectly, but moment by moment, breath by breath. Each return is a return to truth. Each exhale, a release. Over time, this practice of attention becomes less effortful. The breath no longer feels like a technique, but a companion. It grounds you in conversation. It steadies you in conflict. It centers you in sorrow. It deepens your joy. It becomes a thread that connects you to life, to others, to the mystery of being. And it reveals something even deeper, that you are not separate. The breath that enters you now once lived in trees. The air you exhale becomes the breath of another. The boundary between self and other begins to blur. You are no longer an isolated entity, but a wave in the ocean of life. The breath makes this intimate. It makes it real. Inhale, the world enters. Exhale, you give yourself back. This is the beginning of compassion, not as a philosophy, but as a felt truth. You recognize yourself in others because you recognize the breath in them. Their pain becomes understandable, their confusion familiar. You no longer need to judge or defend. You simply breathe with them, breathe as them. This is how the breath opens the heart. And so, the breath becomes not just a path of awareness, but of love. This is the invitation of the Buddha's wisdom, to live fully, one breath at a time, to let go of the illusion of control, to meet reality as it is, to see clearly, love deeply, and act wisely, not in some distant future, but now, in this breath, this very one. The breath is always here. It asks nothing, promises nothing, but offers everything. It is the still point in the turning world. It is the rope that lowers us gently out of our heads and back into the body, back into presence. It does not speak, yet it teaches. It does not argue, yet it shows the truth. And all it asks is that we notice. So begin here with one deep breath. Let it fill you, let it empty you, let it teach you how to be. Because in this breath, the door opens. For much of our lives, we live above the neck. Thought-heavy, future-facing, memory-laden, we drift in abstractions, chasing ideas, solving problems, fantasizing, regretting, planning. The body becomes an afterthought, something to drag around, manage, fix, or ignore. But when we return to the breath, something begins to shift. The breath is not in the mind, it is in the body. And so, when we pay attention to it, truly attend, not conceptually, but experientially, we descend, down out of thought, down into sensation, down into this pulsing, aching, alive mass of flesh and blood. The body, ignored for so long, begins to speak, or rather we begin to listen. It speaks not in language, but in rhythm, in temperature, in tightness. in release. The breath, soft and consistent, becomes the bridge, and with every inhale, we begin to inhabit ourselves again. It is an unfamiliar home for many of us. We are not taught to live here. We are taught to control the body, to discipline it, to push through its signals. Pain is weakness. Fatigue is failure. Desire is dangerous. But the Buddha offered another way, not suppression, not indulgence, but listening. The breath in this sense is not just air, it is attention itself. It is how we enter the body, not by force, but by curiosity, by respect. When we breathe mindfully, the body becomes sacred again, not because it is perfect, but because it is real, because it is here. To feel a breath is to touch truth. The rising belly, the stretch across the ribs, the tingling in the nose. These are not ideas, they are experience. And in that experience, we begin to notice what we've been running from: tension, numbness, holding. These too arise in the body, not as flaws, but as messages. The body holds memory, it holds trauma, it holds joy. But it does not hold stories. That is the mind's job. The body simply responds. And when we return to it with the breath, we begin to unearth these responses. A tightening of the throat when fear arises. A sinking in the chest when sadness comes. A fire in the belly when anger ignites. These are not problems to fix. They are truths to feel. This is why the breath is not just a calming tool, but a teacher of wisdom. When we stay with the breath, we stay with the body. And when we stay with the body, we stay with life. Not our ideas about life, but life as it is unfolding. We begin to see that the present moment is not something we create, it is something we enter. And the doorway is breath. The Buddha's teachings often return to the body. He instructed his followers not to bypass it in their quest for liberation. Rather, he directed them into it, through the breath, through sensation, through mindfulness of the four postures: walking, standing, sitting, lying down. Why? Because the body doesn't lie. The mind can rationalize, distract, defend, but the body is honest. It speaks directly, and it speaks in the language of breath. The inhale draws us in, the exhale lets us go. With each cycle, we are invited deeper, not into thought, but into embodiment. And this matters because liberation is not theoretical. It is lived. It is known in the gut, in the bones, in the heart. Insight may begin in the mind, but it flowers in the body. Still, there is resistance. For some, returning to the body is painful. The body may carry trauma, shame, illness. It may have been a battleground for control, comparison, or punishment. But even here, the breath is a friend. It does not demand we feel everything all at once. It asks only that we stay for one breath, then another, then another. It teaches us to approach the body gently, to meet it where it is. And in this gentleness, healing begins. Not dramatic, not sudden, but steady. As we breathe into tension, we make space for it. As we feel into numbness, we begin to thaw. As we bring awareness to discomfort, it is no longer compounded by resistance. We stop fighting ourselves. And in this stopping, we begin to trust ourselves again. This trust is radical. It goes against so many of our cultural messages. Override, push through, keep going. But the breath says, pause. The breath says, listen. The breath says, this moment is enough. And when we truly believe that, the body softens. It no longer has to shout to be heard. And so the breath becomes not just an anchor, but a balm. It heals by bringing awareness, by interrupting the cycle of reactivity, by allowing space between stimulus and response. The Buddha once said, when touched with a feeling of pain, the untrained person sorrows, grieves and laments, beats their breast and becomes distraught. They feel two pains, physical and mental, but the one who is trained feels only one. This training begins with the breath. It gives us the capacity to stay, with pain, with pleasure, with uncertainty. It teaches us that sensation does not have to become suffering, that we can feel without being overwhelmed. that we can experience without contracting into identity. In this way, the breath reveals the body not as a prison, but as a path, not as something to be escaped, but as something to be embraced. It is through the body that we come home, not to some ideal self, but to the ground of being. To this flesh and blood mystery that breathes and breaks and heals and breathes again. And the more we inhabit the body, the more we belong, not just to ourselves, but to the earth. The breath is the tether. It connects us to the trees, to the wind, to the rain. We breathe what others exhale. We exhale what others will breathe. In this exchange, there is no separation. The body is not a thing apart. It is an expression of nature, constantly changing, constantly participating in the great cycle of life. To breathe consciously, then, is to remember that we are not alone, that we are not isolated minds floating through space. We are beings of earth, breath, and water. We are processes, not products. We are verbs, not nouns. And the body is the proof. So we return again and again through the breath, not to control the body, but to listen to it, not to fix it, but to trust it. The breath reminds us that the body is not the enemy. It is not an obstacle to spiritual life. It is spiritual life. It is the field in which awareness meets reality. It is the vessel through which compassion is expressed. It is the home where awakening unfolds. Not elsewhere, not later. Here, now, in this body, in this breath. And when we know this, not just with the mind, but with the whole of our being, then even the smallest moment becomes sacred. Then walking becomes prayer, eating becomes meditation, sitting becomes surrender. Then the breath is not something we take, but something we receive, with gratitude, with reverence, with wonder. And the body becomes at last a place of peace. A breath comes in, and then it goes. No matter how deeply we inhale, how fully we stretch the chest, how tightly we might try to hold it, the breath must eventually leave. It is not ours to keep. It arrives, sustains, and vanishes. And then, if life allows, another breath follows. Just this, again and again, a rhythm as ancient as birth itself. When the Buddha spoke of impermanence, anicca, he was not referring to something distant or philosophical. He was pointing to this: the breath, always changing; the body, always changing; thoughts, sensations, emotions, changing. All things, from the smallest feeling to the grandest mountain, arise and pass. Nothing clings to its form forever. And yet the human mind resists this truth. We crave continuity. We seek permanence in a world that does not offer it. We cling to identities, relationships, possessions, ideas, as if we could freeze the river, as if we could own something that will not, by its very nature, stay. But the breath will not stay. This too is its power. When we pay close attention to the breath, we are not simply calming the nervous system. We are being shown the very nature of reality. We are being taught, gently but unmistakably, that everything moves, that nothing, no thought, no mood, no self, has solid ground beneath it. This is not meant to frighten us. On the contrary, to know impermanence is to begin to be free, because what the Buddha saw and what the breath reveals is that clinging to what is changing creates suffering. We suffer not because things change, but because we try to stop them from changing. And so, the breath becomes our practice ground. It changes with every moment, sometimes shallow, sometimes deep, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. Sometimes it's barely noticeable. Sometimes it roars through us in grief or passion. The more we sit with it, the more we begin to see, I cannot control this, and I do not need to. With each breath that arises and passes away, we have a chance to let go. Not to give up on life, but to surrender our grip on how we think it should be. We meet life as it is, fleeting, uncertain, beautiful in its vanishing. The practice becomes simple. Watch the breath, feel the breath, Let the breath be exactly what it is, and notice how it cannot be held. Notice how it ends. Notice how it begins again. And in this noticing, wisdom arises, not through analysis, but through direct, embodied knowing. This is the genius of the Buddha's path. He did not ask us to believe in impermanence. He asked us to see it moment by moment. And the breath is the clearest window we have. In meditation, this insight deepens. We begin to see that everything we take to be me is in flux. The body aches, shifts, releases. The mind tosses up a memory, then a plan, then a doubt. Emotions move like clouds: grief, joy, frustration, longing. None of them last. Even the idea of a self begins to lose its edges. Who is the one watching all this? Who are we, if everything within us is changing? And then the next breath comes, and the answer is not found in words, but in presence. We are not the breath, we are not the thought, we are not the emotion, we are that which observes. We are awareness itself, spacious, open, and ungrasping. And awareness does not cling. It sees the passing show with calm eyes. It knows that everything arises and passes, and it rests in the truth of that. To live this way is not passive, it is courageous, because it means opening ourselves to loss, not just the loss of people or things, but the continual loss of what we thought we were. It means grieving what cannot be held. But in that grief is tenderness. In that surrender is clarity. We begin to see beauty not in permanence, but in transience. The way a child laughs and then stops, and that moment never returns. The way sunlight strikes a wall just once each day, and then fades. The way a tear dries. The way a friend says goodbye at the end of a visit. These things are not beautiful in spite of their impermanence. They are beautiful because of it. And the breath teaches us to be present for it all. To live in this way is to walk gently. We stop demanding that people stay the same, that our bodies never age, that our minds always be still. We begin to bow to the ever-shifting dance. We learn to say, yes, this too, this breath, this change, this ending, this beginning. Even suffering becomes workable, because we know it will not last. Because we learn to meet it with space instead of resistance, because we no longer make an identity out of it. And in doing so, we suffer less. We cling less. We live more. The Buddha used the image of a line drawn in water. So much of what we fear, criticism, embarrassment, loss, is like that line. We think it defines us, but the breath shows us. All marks fade. All experiences move through. Nothing defines us forever. And so, we are free to feel everything and to let it go. This is not detachment, this is intimacy. When we know things will pass, we love them more, not less. We pay attention, we say what we mean, we listen, we show up, because we know this moment will not come again. And so the breath becomes not just a teacher of impermanence, but a teacher of compassion. The breath says you do not have forever, but it also says you have this, right now, this breath, this chance to be awake. So we take it in and we let it go. And we bow to this moment, to this breath, to this life, forever vanishing and forever arriving. There are days when the mind feels like a wild horse, tearing across the landscape of our lives, unbridled, unsatisfied, untamed. It drags us into past regrets, pulls us toward future fears, and refuses to rest. This, too, is part of being human. The mind is not the enemy. It is simply untended, untrained. And like the wind, it does what it knows, moves. The Buddha understood this. He did not condemn the mind for its restlessness. He simply saw it clearly and offered a path for its calming, not through control, but through awareness, not through silencing it by force, but by returning to the body, to presence, to the simplicity of one breath. When we first sit down to watch the breath, the mind resists. It floods us with thoughts. This is boring. You're doing it wrong. What's the point? It plays old memories like films on repeat. It strategizes, replays conversations, composes arguments, solves imaginary problems. This is not a mistake. This is what the mind does when it is left untethered. But here is the beauty. The breath does not care, it does not argue, it does not fight, it simply waits. In the middle of the storm, beneath the waves of thought, the breath continues. Quiet, unassuming, steady. It becomes the anchor we return to, not to stop the storm, but to stop being lost in it. One breath, that's all it takes. Not a perfect breath, not a mystical one, just a single conscious inhale, one full exhale. The moment we notice the breath, we have stepped out of the river of thought and onto the shore. We are no longer being pulled by the current. We are observing it. And in this observing, the mind begins, slowly, subtly, to settle. The Buddha likened the mind to a bowl of muddy water. When stirred, it is cloudy, but when left undisturbed, the sediment settles, the water clears. Stillness is not something we create, it is something we uncover, and the breath is the gentle hand that stops stirring. This process is not always immediate. At times, the mind continues to churn. That too is natural, but what changes is our relationship to it. Through the breath, we begin to see thought not as truth, but as activity, not as commands, but as movement. Thoughts come and go like clouds across the sky. We need not chase them. We need not fear them. We simply return to the breath. Again and again we return. Each return is a moment of awakening. This is the practice the Buddha encouraged, satipatthana, the establishment of mindfulness, and at the foundation of it, anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing. He did not offer it as a technique for relaxation, though calm may arise. He offered it as a path to liberation, because in the breath, we begin to see reality as it is, not as we think it should be. The restless mind is driven by craving. It wants stimulation, resolution, entertainment. It runs from discomfort and grasps for pleasure. The breath invites us to pause this chase, to be with what is here. Maybe it is boredom, maybe it is anxiety, maybe it is peace. Whatever it is, the breath makes space for it. It holds it without judgment. And in that space, the compulsion to react weakens. We learn to observe without needing to fix. We learn to let go of the stories the mind spins. We no longer have to get lost in them. The breath becomes the lighthouse in the fog, guiding us back to presence. It does not banish the fog, but it helps us navigate with wisdom. As this practice deepens, we notice something extraordinary. The mind, given the space of breath, begins to trust stillness. It begins to rest. Not because it is forced, but because it recognizes there is nowhere else to go. Nothing needs to be fixed. No thought needs to be finished. In the breath, we find the completeness of the moment. This does not mean we stop thinking. Thought is a tool. It is how we plan, remember, and reflect. But when untethered, it becomes a tyrant. The breath helps us see thought for what it is, a function, not a fact, a servant, not a master. This distinction is liberation, because so often we mistake thoughts for truth. I'm not enough. This will never work out. They don't care about me. These thoughts, when believed, shape our reality. But when seen through the lens of breath, they are recognized as passing events. Just more clouds in the sky. The breath does not argue with them. It outlives them. In this way, the breath is both anchor and mirror. It shows us how often we leave the present. It reveals the patterns of the mind, and it welcomes us back without criticism every single time. This, too, is a teaching. The breath does not scold. It does not shame. It simply offers its rhythm again and again. And that rhythm becomes our teacher in compassion, because as we return to the breath, we learn to return to ourselves, with patience, with kindness, with humility. This softening is essential. The path is not one of violence against the mind, but of understanding it. We do not conquer thought, we befriend it. We see its patterns, its origins, its impermanence, and slowly, gently, we discover we are not those thoughts. We are the awareness in which they arise. That awareness is silent, spacious, unmoving. It is the stillness beneath the storm. And every time we take a conscious breath, we touch it. One breath does not change the world, but it changes our relationship to it. In that breath, we may see that the crisis in our minds is not a crisis in reality. We may see that the anxiety was not about now, but about a story. We may see that the urge to act came not from wisdom, but from habit. And in that seeing, we become free. Free to pause, free to choose, free to be here. This is the gift of the breath. And it is always available. In a traffic jam, in a tense conversation, in the middle of sorrow, in the joy of a quiet morning. The breath is with us, always whispering, "You are already here. You do not need to run. You do not need to fix. Just be. Just breathe." And in this simplicity, the mind bows, not in defeat, but in reverence. It begins to see that peace was never somewhere else. It was here, beneath the noise, in the space between thoughts, in the stillness that the breath reveals. So we return, not to escape the world, but to meet it, calm, grounded, aware, one breath at a time. There is a quiet wisdom in the exhale. It asks for nothing. It clings to nothing. It simply releases. The breath enters the body, nourishes it, and then departs, without demand, without resistance. In that natural rhythm, there is a profound teaching. To let go is not to lose. To let go is to live. The Buddha's path is not a path of accumulation. It is not about gaining more knowledge, more insight, more virtue. It is a path of release, the letting go of clinging, the softening of identity, the opening of the hand, and the breath is our ever-present companion in this unlearning. Each breath says it without words. You can let go now. Let go of the last moment. Let go of the story. Let go of the tension. Let go of the image of who you think you are. Let go. But we often resist this wisdom. Letting go can feel like loss. We believe that if we release our grip, we will fall apart. That if we surrender, we will be diminished. We hold tightly, sometimes to what nourishes us, often to what poisons us, because to let go feels like death. And in a way, it is. To let go is to allow a part of ourselves to die, an idea, a certainty, a control, but in that death is renewal. Every exhale creates space for the next inhale. Every letting go makes way for something new. This is the truth the Buddha embodied under the Bodhi tree. Liberation is not found in having more, but in needing less. To sit and follow the breath is to enter into a daily ritual of surrender. We breathe in and we breathe out. We gather and we release. We meet the moment and we let it pass. And slowly, we begin to see how tightly we have been holding on to emotions, to beliefs, to control, to the desire for things to be other than they are. The breath offers us an alternative. It shows us that life is not something to be gripped, but something to be flowed with. That peace does not come from fixing everything, but from loosening our insistence that it be different. We do not need to control each moment. We need only be present for it. This is what the Buddha meant by non-attachment. Not indifference, not numbness, but freedom from the illusion that anything can be held forever. We can still love deeply, engage fully, care passionately, but we do so without clinging. We do so knowing that everything, joy and sorrow, praise and blame, birth and death, will pass. And so we exhale. We let go of the desire to control the past. It is gone. The breath has already left the body. We let go of the anxiety about the future. It has not yet come. The next breath will arrive when it is time. We rest in the only place we ever truly exist, now. And in this now, the breath shows us the ease of being. The mind may race, the world may spin, but the breath is simple. One in, one out. We need not accomplish anything. We need not become someone else. We simply allow. We release. Even in difficulty, the breath holds us, especially in difficulty. When grief tightens the chest, when anger burns in the belly, when fear seizes the throat, the breath does not abandon us. It remains. It becomes a companion through suffering, not by solving it, but by staying with it. And with each exhale, we drop a little of the armor. We do not let go all at once. The process is gradual, like melting ice. We soften moment by moment. We allow what is here, and then, breath by breath, we begin to release. Letting go of blame, letting go of shame, letting go of the need to be right, letting go of the old narratives that say, I am not enough, I must prove myself, I must control everything. The breath does not believe these stories. It simply continues, steady, faithful, present. And in its presence we remember that we are already whole. We remember that we can breathe even in uncertainty, that we can stand still even in chaos, that we can trust the unfolding even when we do not understand it. Letting go is not something we do once. It is a way of living. It is a practice, and the breath is our teacher. Every time we come back to the exhale, we practice trust. Trust that the next breath will come. Trust that we do not need to force anything. Trust that we are supported, not by ideas, but by the body, the earth, the present moment. This trust is quiet. It does not shout. It does not demand proof. It arises slowly like dawn, each breath bringing a little more light. Eventually we begin to let go, even of the need to let go. There is no longer a me trying to surrender. There is just surrender. There is just breath, and life lives itself through us. This is what the Buddha meant by freedom, not a life without pain, but a life without bondage. Pain may arise, but we do not become it. Joy may arise, and we do not cling to it. Everything is welcomed. Everything is released. And the breath shows us how. To inhale is to meet the world. To exhale is to let it pass through. We do not need to hold everything. We only need to feel it and then let it go. So we return to the breath, to the body, to this moment. We exhale the striving. We exhale the fear. We exhale the story. And in that emptying, we find fullness. Not the fullness of possession, but the fullness of presence, of freedom, of knowing that we are not what we hold, but what we are. Conscious, alive, breathing here. Letting go is not weakness. It is courage. It is the courage to stop running, the courage to trust the ground beneath us, the courage to say, this moment is enough. The breath invites us into this courage, one breath at a time, one letting go at a time, until we live, not from fear, but from freedom. The breath begins in the body, but it does not end there. Though it enters through our nose, expands our lungs, and flows through the body's interior landscape, the breath is never truly ours. It comes from the world. It is part of the world. It returns to the world. We breathe because the trees breathe. We breathe what others exhale. This invisible exchange is the quiet reminder that we are never alone. There is no such thing as my breath. There is only the breath passing through this body for a time. And that is where compassion begins. The Buddha taught that to see clearly is to love deeply. And when we sit with the breath, not just as a tool for calming ourselves, but as a living thread connecting us to all things, our hearts begin to awaken. We realize, just as this breath flows through me, it flows through you. Just as I feel joy and pain, so do you. Just as I long for safety, so does every other being. The breath humbles us. It equalizes us. It reminds us that before identity, before belief, before name or form, we are all simply living, breathing beings, held in the same delicate web of interdependence. The first breath we ever took was not something we created. It was given. A gasp into this world, a sign of arrival. We didn't earn it, we didn't choose it. It was a gift, and every breath since has carried that same grace. In the same way, Compassion is not something we manufacture. It is something we remember. It is something that naturally arises when we stop contracting into me and begin to see the whole. The breath helps us do this. As we sit in silence, noticing the rise and fall of the belly, the air on the upper lip, the expansion and release, we begin to soften. We begin to listen, not just to ourselves, but to life. And in that listening, empathy grows. We realize how much we are all carrying. The man in traffic who cuts us off, he too is breathing through stress and fear. The child in the store having a tantrum, she too is breathing through emotions she cannot yet name. The friend who hurt us with harsh words, he too is breathing through his own wounds. To feel our breath is to feel theirs, not literally but with the heart. It is to sense that behind all behaviors there is this common thread, the vulnerability of being alive. And in that vulnerability we find kinship. The Buddha spoke often of karuna, compassion, not as pity, but as the trembling of the heart in response to suffering. It is not about feeling sorry for others. It is about feeling with them, about allowing our own pain to open us to the pain of the world, not to be consumed by it, but to let it deepen our care. The breath becomes our ally in this, because compassion can feel like too much. The suffering of the world can feel endless, overwhelming. But the breath grounds us. It reminds us we don't need to carry it all. We need only be present, here, now. One breath of tenderness, one breath of presence, one breath of connection. This is enough to begin. Even when compassion turns inward, the breath is there. In fact, this is often where we must start, because many of us have closed our hearts to ourselves. We treat our own suffering with judgment, our own mistakes with punishment. But the breath does not abandon us. Even in our worst moments, it stays. Even in our shame, it breathes through us. It says, you are still worthy. You are still alive. You are still part of the whole. Breathing with ourselves, we begin to remember our own basic goodness, not in an inflated way, but in the quiet realization that we are human, that we are trying, that we are not alone in our struggles. The practice of loving kindness, metta, often begins with the breath. Breathing in, we offer care. Breathing out, we release ill will. It is a gentle rhythm. May I be safe, may I be well, may I be at peace. These phrases ride the breath like a wave, and as the heart softens, the circle expands. May you be safe, may you be well, may you be at peace. From self to friend, from friend to stranger, from stranger to enemy, from enemy to all beings. We breathe and the heart opens. We breathe and separation dissolves. We breathe and we see. No one is outside the circle of care, not even ourselves. The breath teaches us this because it is utterly democratic. It flows through kings and prisoners, saints and sinners. It does not discriminate. And when we learn to see ourselves in the breath, we begin to extend that same openness to others. In daily life, this practice becomes a refuge, a difficult conversation. Breathe with it, an encounter with injustice. Breathe and act with clarity, not reactivity. A moment of overwhelm. Breathe and return to the ground of your being. The breath doesn't fix the world, but it changes how we meet it. It gives us the space to respond, not react. It gives us the capacity to feel without collapsing. It becomes the rhythm of compassion lived out, one moment at a time. Over time, this changes us. Over time, this changes us. We become less hard, more tender, less defensive, more open, less caught in self-interest, more attuned to the collective. Compassion ceases to be something we should have. It becomes the natural outflow of a heart aligned with truth. And the breath is the thread that keeps us connected to that truth. We breathe and we remember life is fragile. We breathe and we remember everyone is struggling with something. We breathe and we remember this too shall pass. And in this remembering we soften, not to become passive, but to become present, to become available to the suffering around us, not as a burden, but as a call. The Buddha once said, As a mother would protect her only child with her life, even so, let one cultivate a boundless love toward all beings. That kind of love does not arise from willpower. It arises from intimacy, from closeness, from being so near to life in our own breath and body that the boundary between me and you begins to fade. The breath is that nearness. It is always here, and in its rhythm, we remember our deepest nature, not as separate beings navigating a hostile world, but as a great web of life, breathing together, healing together, waking up together. There is a silence within the breath that cannot be spoken. Not the absence of sound, but a deeper stillness, a quiet that underlies all movement, all thought, all feeling. This silence is not created, it is revealed, and the breath is the path. When we sit, gently following the inhale and the exhale, the world begins to soften. At first it may not seem so. The mind remains noisy, the body fidgety, the room full of distractions. But beneath it all, something waits. Not outside us, but within. Not far, but forgotten. Stillness. We are not used to it. The world is loud. It demands attention, rewards productivity, glorifies speed. Even our inner world reflects this noise. Endless commentary, self-judgment, planning, remembering, trying. We fill every moment, every space, every silence. We avoid the quiet, afraid of what it might show us. But silence is not empty. It is not void. It is full with presence, with awareness, with truth. And the breath leads us there. We begin by listening, not just to the breath, but with the breath. The sound of it moving in through the nose, the feel of it rising in the chest, the whisper of the exhale. At first, this listening feels mechanical, like effort. But then, something shifts. The listening deepens. It spreads beyond the breath. It becomes a listening to the moment itself. This is not ordinary hearing. This is the kind of listening the Buddha invited when he said, "Be still and know." Stillness is not the enemy of life. It is the ground of life. All things arise from it. The breath emerges from silence and returns to it. Thoughts do the same. Emotions, sensations, all come and go, but silence remains. And if we stay with the breath long enough, gently, faithfully, we begin to touch that unchanging space. We begin to rest in it, not as escape, not as withdrawal, but as return. The breath becomes less an object and more a rhythm that opens us to something deeper. The body softens, the mind quiets, not because we forced it to, but because it recognizes the beauty of resting. Awareness expands. We are no longer thinking about silence. We are silence, breathing. This silence is not blank. It is alive. It listens. It receives. It holds everything: grief, joy, restlessness, peace, without resistance. To sit with the breath is to relearn this kind of listening. It is to discover that beneath the surface noise of life, there is always a deeper current, a silence that is never broken, only covered. A peace that was never gone, only overlooked. This is what the Buddha discovered beneath the Bodhi tree. Not just a philosophical insight, but a direct experience of the stillness that gives rise to all things. Not a silence of suppression, but a silence that listens to the world with love. And so we listen too. We listen to the body, not to judge it, but to hear what it says. The aches, the tensions, the aliveness. We listen to the mind, not to believe everything it offers, but to see its patterns, its movements, its impermanence. We listen to the heart, not to indulge its every whim, but to acknowledge its longings, its wounds, its capacity to love. And we listen to the breath, not to control it, but to let it reveal the space in which everything is held. This kind of listening changes how we live. We stop rushing to fill every silence with sound. We begin to see that silence is not awkward, it is sacred. We stop speaking simply to fill space. We learn to speak from stillness, to act from clarity, to listen to others with full attention, not formulating our reply while they speak, but truly hearing them. Because when we listen from the breath, we listen with the whole body. We become a vessel, not just for information, but for presence. And in this presence, healing happens. Sometimes in silence, old grief surfaces, old anger, old fear. We might be tempted to run, to distract ourselves, but the breath stays. It doesn't flinch. It doesn't judge. It simply moves gently with us. It holds the silence like a cradle. And we realize we can stay too. We can feel without being overwhelmed. This is the gift of deep listening to ourselves, to others, to life. And the deeper we listen, the less we need to know, the less we need to explain or analyze or control. Because we begin to understand something the intellect cannot grasp. The truth is not always in the words. It is in the spaces between them. It is in the silence that holds them. The Buddha spoke of noble silence, a silence not of avoidance, but of presence, a silence that speaks volumes, a silence born not from emptiness, but from fullness. In this silence, ego fades. The small self dissolves. What remains is vast, open, quiet awareness. We do not need to call it anything. We do not need to name it. We need only breathe with it and let it carry us beyond the surface, beyond identity, beyond thought, into the stillness that was never far away, into the listening that was always waiting, into the truth that cannot be spoken, only known. We begin to see that this silence is not a place we visit during meditation. It is the core of who we are. It is always here, beneath the noise, beneath the roles, beneath the breath. And when we live from that silence, everything changes. We speak more carefully. We listen more deeply. We act more wisely. We begin to walk in the world not as someone chasing peace, but as someone who carries it. The breath brought us here, not with force, not with noise, but with quiet invitation. And in that quiet we heard the truth. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be fixed. You are already home. Breathe and listen. The entire path, the Buddha once said, is found within this fathom-long body. And within this body, what moves, what sustains, what connects each moment to the next is the breath. Not some grand philosophy, not an elaborate ritual, just this breath. One inhale, one exhale, one opening into the truth of now. That is the door to freedom, and it has always been open. We spend much of our lives seeking understanding, seeking peace, seeking something more. We climb spiritual mountains and dig through intellectual soil, thinking the answer is somewhere far away. Just one more insight, one more experience, one more breakthrough away. But the breath does not ask us to go anywhere. It asks us to stop, to come back, to feel, to be. And in that returning, we discover that what we were looking for was never lost. We do not breathe to reach some goal. We breathe to remember that this moment is enough, that we are enough. That awareness, just as it is, quiet, clear, ungrasping, is the heart of awakening. The Buddha called it sati, mindfulness, presence, the power of remembrance. The ability to meet what is happening without adding to it, without pulling away from it, without being consumed by it. This is not a passive presence. It is luminous, intimate, alive, and it begins with a breath. A breath that says, I am here. A breath that whispers, you can let go. A breath that invites us to see clearly, not through the lens of the past, not through the fog of the future, but through the direct knowing of now. This breath, this sensation, this awareness, that is the practice. Not in some distant retreat, not in perfect silence, but here in the middle of our messy, beautiful, ordinary lives. Waiting in line, sitting at a red light, walking across a room, pausing before we speak. We can always take a conscious breath. We can always come home. And this coming home is radical, because it refuses the habit of escape. It refuses the old belief that joy lies elsewhere, that wholeness is conditional, that peace is something to chase. It dares to say, this is it. This breath is enough, even when it's shallow, even when it's fast, even when the mind resists and the heart aches and the body trembles. Still, the breath is here. Still, it holds us. Still, It reminds us that we are alive, that we are part of something vast and intimate at once. Every spiritual tradition has its doorway to truth. For the Buddha, that doorway was presence, and the breath is how we step through it. It is so simple we miss it. So close we overlook it. But the breath waits, not in judgment, not in urgency, but in love. Not the sentimental love of greeting cards and promises, but the steady, spacious love of what simply is. The love that holds pain and beauty with equal tenderness. The love that does not push or pull, but simply allows. That is what one breath holds. And that is why one breath is enough. Enough to pause. Enough to see clearly. Enough to remember what matters. Enough to return to this body, this moment, this life. Because the truth is, we don't have forever. Each breath is borrowed. Each one could be our last. The Buddha spoke often of impermanence, not to frighten us, but to wake us up, to remind us that the most precious thing we have is this fleeting, beating moment, and that how we meet it, whether with grasping or with grace, shapes the quality of our life. One deep breath can be the difference between reaction and response, between clinging and letting go, between mindlessness and awareness. It's not about stopping thoughts. It's not about becoming some ideal version of ourselves. It's about waking up to what's already here. The sound of the wind, the taste of your tea, the tightness in your chest, the curve of someone's smile, the silence in between the words, the breath moving through it all. This is life, not as we wish it to be, but as it is. And when we meet it fully, with one deep breath, we meet the sacred. Not some abstract concept, but the sacredness of presence, the sacredness of being alive, the sacredness of knowing, even if just for a moment, that nothing more is needed. This is the power of one deep breath. It gathers all the teachings of the Buddha and makes them immediate. It brings the lofty into the intimate. It brings the distant into the now. It makes freedom something we can feel, not just something we imagine. And when we truly know this, when we trust it, something shifts. We stop waiting for enlightenment to arrive wrapped in thunder. We stop chasing after peace like a mirage. We begin to live. We begin to bow to the small moments. We begin to see that the ordinary is the path, that the breath is the teacher, that our own body is the monastery, that awakening is not a finish line, but a way of seeing, one breath at a time. And so we continue, not with striving, not with force, but with a quiet faith in this moment, with a willingness to return, with a heart that knows everything changes. And yet here we are, breathing, alive, aware, free. One breath is enough. Always has been, always will be.